Dwelling in the shadows of the realm of chaos, Vashtorr the Arkhifane had not emerged into reality for millennia. However, with the advent of the Indomitus era, the ancient demon manifested once more. Forming an alliance with Abaddon the Despoiler, Vashtorr the Arkhifane sought to ascend and become not merely another powerful demon, but a new god of chaos. Through the boundless cosmic wastelands of the land of lost souls, an ancient ship of the Astartes moved slowly. Shrouded by the tides of the warp, the vessel, coloured in blackened iron, constantly attracted flocks of demonic furies, which followed the ship for a time, much like schools of small fish following a colossal leviathan. However, the Gellerfields prevented the demons from penetrating the hull, and when they lost interest, they disappeared, only to be replaced by new ones. Since its construction, the barge had been to many places, but it had never ventured to such a distant region before. Adhering as best it could to the course set by the crew, the starship passed by bizarre structures, brought into existence by the minds of mortals and the forces of demons. Thus, if the crew members had raised the shields on the viewing ports, they would have seen entire seas of boiling tar flowing through petrified forests, enormous whimsical staircases reaching into the sky where they merged into peculiar loops, or citadels made of bones and fortresses of human limbs and blood. This place was a sanctuary for powerful demonic entities and demon princes who served none of the chaos gods and preferred to keep their distance from them. Here was also located the monstrous foundry, a dark reflection of the Forge worlds, known as the Forge of Souls. The Forge of Souls was perpetually shrouded in a veil of black, oily smoke and the wails of countless tormented souls. In the numerous manufactories of the Forge, ever-mutating demonic artisans endlessly toiled, stoking black fires with the souls of the damned in their howling bellows, inhabited by legions of semi-sentient nightmare creatures. Every demon, every mechanism, and every soul obeyed the will of a single entity, the true demigod, Vashtorr the Arkhifane. Those ascending to the command deck were far from thrilled at the prospect of the impending encounter. The doors leading to the bridge opened, and a massive figure entered, leaning on a thunderhammer. All present on the bridge respectfully greeted the newcomer. Some struck their chests, some bowed their heads, while others fell to their knees, averting their gaze. Narbador acknowledged the greeting only from his brothers, and even then they received merely a brief nod, for the warpsmith was in no mood. Taking a few mighty steps to the command throne, Narbador stopped, and staring into nowhere, quietly said, "Once we all had a dream of unity. And look where it has led us, my lord, to the backwaters, and not even the backwaters of the Imperium or the galaxy, but the damned warp. I've never seen a hole like this in my life." The warpsmith was sarcastically interrupted by Captain Harrigan, who was standing by one of the consoles. "I suspected that in 10,000 years the pangs of conscience would drive us mad, but even I could not have imagined this. As you often like to remind me, Harrigan, we are traitors, and the path to Mars is closed to traitors. Where do you propose we find the mines and resources for our ambitious venture? Anywhere, even on loyal Forge worlds or on the worlds of the Dark Mechanicum. That's far better than flying into the unknown, let alone dealing with him. I thought your loyal soul would not allow you to fall so low, Warpsmith." Narbador merely winced and did not respond to his captain's jab, perhaps because there was a grain of truth in Harrigan's words. The warsmith loathed demons and preferred to have nothing to do with them. However, fate had decreed otherwise, and all that remained for him was to seek the help of a powerful demonic entity. "What do we really know about him?" asked Harrigan. "Not much. He is known to few among mortals and immortals alike, as throughout his long history of existence, he has only appeared in real space a handful of times. Why Vashtorr does this so rarely is unknown, but those who have seen the Arkhifane say that even the vague silhouette of the techno-demonic phantom instills indescribable horror, and his appearance portends a nightmarish catastrophe. Even his birth is shrouded in mystery. Some claim he was created during the reckless arms race of the Age of Strife that engulfed the galaxy. Others believe he was born in the warp, or was birthed by the horrors of the Dark Age, or vice versa. Others, in turn, prefer to think that Vashtorr gained great influence in the warp through a series of technological catastrophes and events, such as the appearance of the Necrons as we now know them, the cursed founding of the Adeptus Astartes, and the creation of a new breed of warriors, the blasphemy upon the works of the Emperor, the Primaris Space Marines. In any case, it is well known that Vashtorr was never a mortal who ascended to demonhood, nor a demonic entity serving one of the Great Four. The Arkhifane, the master of the Forge of Souls and the ruler of this pit, or at least a large part of it, is a demonic demigod of inventors, engineers, scientists and craftsmen. He embodies curiosity and innovation, stripped of morality and taken to the darkest extremes. Anyone brave or foolish enough, be they mortal or demon, can turn to the intermediaries of the Forge of Souls to make a pact with Vashtorr. Some see in a pact with this ancient entity a quick path to military power, which could enable them to gain greater favor from their patron god. Others seek to use such a pact to circumvent spiritual bonds and the prolonged disgrace caused by banishment from real space. Whatever their reason, Vashtorr and his demonic intermediaries are eager to make a contract. In exchange for the agreed-upon price of mortal souls, gathered and offered to the Forge, the essence is reforged and transformed into a grotesque fusion of a war machine and a demon. Thus, an essence that offers a sufficient quantity of souls can be turned into a soul grinder, a machine of calamity, or an infernal bombard. Other demons, more desperate or possessing fewer resources for the soul forge, simply become enslaved by Vashtorr, painfully merging with unholy machinery and augmenting the ranks of his coerced demonic army. Distinctive markings of such demons include collars, manacles, and ritual chains, which become part of their new form while they remain in debt to the Arkhifane. Unlike other demons, deceit, trickery, or deception are not characteristic of Vashtorr. All his contracts contain clear conditions. Instead, he allows the monomaniacal nature of demons themselves to lure them into his nets. For with each defeat of an enslaved being, their debt for their soul grows, and few demons have ever managed to escape the bondage of the Forge of Souls. Meanwhile, the utility of grotesque war machines to the demonic legions of the ruinous powers, as well as the danger of becoming the only chaos god to lose favor with Vashtorr, keeps the other dark gods from retaliating for the loss of their servants, as the Arkhifane is the greatest arms dealer in the great game. Moreover, he serves none of the four and simultaneously is an unreliable ally to them all. However, Vashtorr's activities incite the wrath of other demons, primarily Belacor, another independent demon who serves chaos undivided. Yet it is not only the Arkhifane's neutrality that restrains the other demons from confronting him. Besides the infernal hosts he can summon to fight for him, Vashtorr himself is a terrifyingly powerful entity of the warp, reshaping the mechanism of reality at will, or hovering above battlefields in real space amid storms of imperial lightning. The Arkhifane is a demigod of dark artistry and malign technologies. He is a demon of ordered and meticulous malevolence, whose will is as inexorable as the turning gears of a great and unstoppable machine. And despite all he has accomplished, Vashtorr is dissatisfied with his position and seeks to become the fifth Chaos God. That's how we might become mere pawns in this battle, Harrigan mused. If he hasn't shown himself for millennia, what has driven him to reveal himself now? Could it be the Great Rift? Perhaps, but more likely it was, oddly enough, Abaddon personally that attracted him. As he led his legions against Vigilus, other forces of the traitors struck at systems and worlds around it. One such attack was led by the warpsmith Vask, who assaulted the Adeptus Mechanicus data repository on Pergamatros. It is rumored that this attack is what drew Vashtorr's attention, who subsequently appeared on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. The vaults on Pergamatros attracted the gaze of Abaddon, as they were specifically created by the Ordo Malleus to store forbidden data. The catastrophe on this secluded moon began with minute power surges that continued for several years. The damage was inflicted so gradually that it went unnoticed until the power cables were exposed and worn, and their illuminated plastic casings had finally melted away. When the next power spike triggered a maintenance signal, the responding servitor itself was in a poor technical state, its cognitive subroutines harboring a recursive fault. Although it should have been disposed of long ago, its defects were deemed minor, and it was decided that it could continue its duties for a few more days. Thus, when the servitor extended its manipulator claws and opened the inspection hatch in a distant tunnel, its right claw struck a node in the cooling system pipes, which, gradually corroded from the inside by acids, also had a fatal defect. The pipes burst under what seemed to be the random strike of the servitor's claw, and a jet of pressurized coolant gushed from the ruptured pipe, drenching the servitor and the wires. It took the emergency response maniple 11 minutes to reach the malfunction site, and another 4 to cut away enough of the molten mass that had once been the servitor to reach the inspection hatch. But by that time, the overload of the systems powered by that line had already done its malicious work. In the absence of automatic backup systems, the Magos successfully awakened the secondary systems, but it was already too late. Within 5 minutes and 15 seconds, the existence of Pergamatros was revealed to anyone scanning space with an Auspex. And, of course, in just a few moments, the augurs of the Black Legion's battlecruiser, the Unrepentant, received the targeting data after their operators detected the partial return of sensor ghosts and decided to investigate them. The Unrepentant received perfectly clear data on the location of Pergamatros, as well as its nature and hints of the wealth it concealed. However, Pergamatros was not an easy target. Defensive lasers covered all approaches to the artificial moon, and the surface was protected by void shields and adamantium armor a foot thick. Legions of Skitarii were prepared to fight to the death for every stronghold on its surface, for every staircase and info cannon below it, as was a maniple of Warhound-class Titans from Legio Maledictus, also standing guard over the moon. However, Warpsmith Vask knew all this thanks to the astonishing clarity of the visions received by the augurs of his ship, and accordingly, his forces were prepared for it. The Black Legionary forces were supported by the detachments of renegades from the Hounds of Abaddon and the Worms of Agony. In addition, Magos Persephora Hexen was accompanying them into battle, commanding cohorts of Magi, Skitarii, and mutant combat servitors. Additionally, the Dark Mechanicum provided dozens of war machines and eerie warships to support this operation. After the defensive mines of the moon were destroyed from orbit and the shield generators suffered a mysterious failure, the Loyalist forces besieged the waves of invading traitors landing at both poles of the Pergamatros. While packs of war machines driven by heretical intelligence entangled the Warlord-class Titans, the Legionnaires and their allies pushed back the Skitarii, suppressing the Loyalist resistance. However, the raid did not come without a cost for the traitors, as the services of the Adeptus Mechanicus fought with fanatical desperation. Nevertheless, they could not prevent the extermination teams of Legionnaires and traitor Magi from breaking through the airlock hatches and penetrating the info canals. In the final hours of the battle, a malfunctioning autogate trapped Magos Minoris Jurek inside a long-abandoned data repository which he had stumbled upon by chance. Being one of the many junior Dark Magi tasked with uncovering the secrets of the Pergamatros for their masters, Jurek eluded his companions by following a strange warp trace that only he seemed to detect. While his accompanying group of killer servitors were crashing through the malfunctioning door to free their master, Jurek surveyed the dusty repository and noticed a shrine deep in its shadows. It took him a few moments to remove the shackles binding the shrine, and by the time his cyborg assistants had torn through the door and reached him, Jurek already held in his hands a peculiar data tome sealed within the shrine. Upon touching it, his augmented senses tingled from the rustling of static voices, promising the fallen priest knowledge and power beyond his wildest dreams. Understanding that his masters would soon retreat to the vengeful spirit, and that he would have to return to his role as one of the countless workers servicing the colossal ship's systems, Jurek decided to decipher the secrets hidden within this tome immediately, and use them to gain the favor of the despoiler through some crafty demonstration of power. Jurek transported the tome from the depths of the Pergamatros onto the vengeful spirit to Vashtorr the Arkhifane, who was aboard the ship. No one knows how the fate of the galaxy might have changed had Abaddon decided to attack the demonic intruder, However, as the tense seconds dragged on, the bridge of the vengeful spirit did not transform into a battlefield, despite the emergence of a colossal being. Instead of extending its claws toward the demigod towering above him, Abaddon sighed and began to speak. The despoiler demanded to know the identity of Vashtorr, which of the dark gods he served, what he had done to his ship, and how a group of cultists had so effectively summoned Vashtorr from the warp. The despoiler expected riddles and deceit, instead of a direct answer to his questions, for in his experience any demon not inclined towards immediate aggression would invariably attempt some trick or foster discord. After all, the first captain had dealt with such duplicitous entities as Belacor and many other demons, each of whom believed themselves far more cunning and powerful than any mortal. Therefore, Abaddon was taken aback when Vashtorr responded candidly. The demon proclaimed himself the Lord of the Soul Forge, and was deeply affronted by the insinuation that he might be a servant of another deity. The fury with which the denial was delivered intrigued Abaddon. He heard in Vashtorr's response an echo of his own resistance to bowing before the dark gods, and despite everything, the despoiler felt his distrust of this strange demon begin to wane. As for the peculiar phenomena occurring throughout the vengeful spirit, Vashtorr advised Abaddon to consider them as gifts. The demon neither concealed nor apologized for the fact that, had he wished to turn the warship's mechanisms against Abaddon and his followers, he would have undoubtedly done so. Instead, the demon repaired and even improved the ship with supernatural celerity. Abaddon paused their difficult conversation to seek confirmation of these claims through the Vox channels, which Vashtorr had cleared of distortions. Unsurprisingly, the puzzled fallen magi and warpsmiths confirmed the demon's words. And although some demonic entities had been expelled from their long-held territories, the orderly biomechanical systems that emerged in their wake proved to be much more efficient. Still harboring suspicion, the first captain ordered his most experienced sorcerers to scrutinize every inch of the ship for any signs of Vashtorr's duplicity and motioned for the demon to continue. The cultists, as Vashtorr explained, were nothing more than insignificant cogs in his endless machine. They and all the events surrounding them were a trivial example of the influence he could exert on the mechanisms of reality. Abaddon was incensed by the demon's conclusions and retorted bluntly that he had managed for 10,000 years not to kneel before any of the dark gods, and it was highly unlikely that he would now be deceived into doing so before someone he derisively called the god of cogitators. However, the captain was taken aback when Vashtorr seemed to be amused by this response. The demon declared that he did not wish to deceive or trap Abaddon, asserting that instead he was merely seeking a mutually beneficial alliance. Vashtorr was aware of Abaddon's hunt for the crucial fragment of prophecy that was said to lead him to a weapon capable of altering fate. In truth, as Vashtorr explained, Abaddon's scholars had already found the answer, but simply did not comprehend what it was. After these words, all the screens and cogitators on the bridge flickered and began to display prophecies instead of the symbols that had previously flashed across them. In sleep, the sky burns, stars shine bright enough to drown out the darkness. These were the words of the prophecy that Abaddon had been searching for. Vashtorr claimed he could interpret its words. By uniting his legions with Abaddon's, he could make events unfold in a way that would benefit them both. After these words, the first captain grew more suspicious than ever, listening for any hint of coercion or seemingly trivial conditions of the proposed deal. But Vashtorr stated his intentions plainly, and their scope, along with the demon's ambitions, impressed even Abaddon. Being a demigod in the warp, Vashtorr wanted more. He sought true apotheosis, to become the fifth dark god and earnestly join the great game. Vashtorr believed that his path to divinity laid through the fulfillment of the prophecy, and thus he was more than willing to aid Abaddon in his long war to achieve his goal. This did not convince the despoiler, as he had heard nothing from this demon but words and grand declarations. Unperturbed, Vashtorr urged Abaddon to gather as large a force as he deemed necessary and accompany him to the neighboring system, to the world of Magdalor. There, as Vashtorr claimed, Abaddon would see the value of their alliance, as well as receive what the demon cryptically called the next fragment of the key. Confident that he could crush his potential ally if he proved to be wrong, the first captain agreed. The world of Magdalor, in which Vashtorr had shown so much interest, was under the control of the Astartes of the Iron Angels chapter, who had seized this planet at the beginning of the 33rd millennium after losing their homeworld. After the conquest, they hollowed out the peak of the highest mountain on Magdalor and built within it a new fortress monastery, which they named the Angel's Crown. There, the Astartes placed all their precious relics that they had managed to save. Over the millennia, the chapter had suffered enormous losses and upheavals, and when the fleet of the Black Legion arrived in the orbit of Magdalor, the numbers of the Iron Angels were far from satisfactory. Nevertheless, they possessed a vast fleet and were ready to fight back. As for Abaddon, when he arrived in the system, Vashtorr was nowhere to be seen, as the first captain had expected. However, the despoiler was glad to obliterate an entire chapter of Space Marines and did not refrain from launching an attack. But as Abaddon advanced deeper into the Angel's Crown, he discovered the aftermath of a strange massacre. Space Marines and the Order's servants laid among the bloodied wreckage of destroyed chambers. Armoured bulkheads had turned into jagged maws, devouring those who tried to defend them. Servitors had mutated, becoming nightmarish creatures. Furthermore, Abaddon saw everywhere the characteristic splatters of ectoplasm and bluish scars left by warp flame. Someone else had already torn the heart out of the Angel's Crown, and the first captain suspected who it might be. His forces encountered bound demons and mutated war machines of the warp host near the heart of the fortress. Here the chapter master of the Iron Angels and the last warriors of the First Company held the defence, protecting the Reclusium and Apothecarion. Wasting no time, Abaddon led his elite warriors and the mumbling hordes of demons into an attack, eager to quickly deal with the Loyalists. The ensuing battle would have added some noble entries to the annals of the Iron Angels had any of them survived to record them. However, when malicious entities began to emerge from the machineries of the Apothecarion, Reclusiarch couldn't bear it and led the warriors in a furious counterattack that might have cleared the room entirely, if not for Vashtorr, who personally crushed the defiant chaplain with his soul-forge hammer. At the same time, the despoiler clashed blades with the chapter master and of course emerged victorious from this duel. After the battle, Vashtorr and Abaddon walked side by side into the Reclusium, strewn with the corpses of Loyalists. The demon ignored the precious tapestries and glowing blades, instead halting before a tall marble column protected by a power field. Abaddon looked questioningly at the column, then at Vashtorr. In response, the demon simply beckoned. The object within the power field trembled, and its soft golden light shifted to a smoky brown as the power field generators released twisting metallic tendrils of flesh, dutifully carrying the column towards Vashtorr. It seemed this was the coveted prize Vashtorr had sought on Magdalor. After several hours of negotiations with the demon, Abaddon learned that the column was a fragment of the so-called key, whose restoration would benefit both Vashtorr and the despoiler. Over the next few months, the Black Legion, under Vashtorr's direction, began to gather and rebuild enormous space hulks, spending many days cleansing these constructs of various enemies and suffering significant losses in the process. Vashtorr used his techno-sorcery to further corrupt the captured space hulks. Various champions of chaos, commanded by Abaddon and other lords whom the despoiler considered his allies, were assigned as captains of these resurrected hulks, which soon became known as the Arks of Omen. The primary task of these vessels was to assault worlds across the galaxy and search for further fragments of the key. While Vashtorr laboured over new arcs, the existing ones began their devastating crusade across the galaxy, attacking planets with varying degrees of success and being assaulted by both loyalists and traitors. The Arkhifane himself reappeared only after the demon Primarch Angron destroyed the planet Malakbale. Vashtorr was drawn to a device located on the planet known as the Choral Engine. Walking among the planet's rubble, Vashtorr found the shattered device, which had turned into a great rift of corn following Angron's attack, destroying the nearby Ark Stygian Heart. Vashtorr shaped it into a stairway and proceeded towards what once was the planet's core. Scooping up a stone mass from the core, Vashtorr opened a warp portal and vanished. After Angron annihilated the Crusade Quarters fleet at Malak Baal, Vashtorr decided to commence his own crusade, aiming to assault the Rock, the mobile fortress monastery of the Dark Angels, and one of the most formidable strongholds of the Imperium, where he believed another fragment of the key was hidden. However, the Arkhifane did not intend to tackle such a significant task alone. Leveraging his alliance with Abaddon, he gained command over several fleets and warbands of the Black Legion under the command of Zorphus. He was also joined by the Iron Warriors, provided by Vashtorr's fickle ally Perturabo, and the Word-Bearers, who led their own army of cultists and demonic machines, known as the Cult of the Primarch. Vashtorr personally led the assault, advancing ahead of the fleet on his personal ark, known as Aurak Unleashed. Utilizing the diabolical mind of his ark, Oracle Myriad, the Arkhifane managed to locate the Rock and the accompanying fleet, after which he devised an ambush plan for the Dark Angels. He relied on an infernal warp weapon known as Unmaker, which had enough power to destroy the void shields of the fortress monastery. Gorgon's Aegis. Vashtorr attacked the Dark Angels at the moment when their fleet was rushing to aid the chaos-besieged planet Marwent's Reach. The traitor fleet materialized from the warp at pre-selected ambush positions and unleashed a punishing barrage upon the Dark Angels' ships. Reacting swiftly, Chief Librarian Ezekiel transferred fleet command to Samael, while he attempted to head to Marwent's Reach. Samael was tasked with dispersing the ships and initiating a retreat. However, the Dark Angels' fleet suffered significant losses after the first salvo. The warships, the Revenged, Silent Sentinel, Primarch's Roar, Obsidian Sword and Valiant Ire were destroyed, while the Geller field on the frigate Solemn Vow failed, leading to its being overrun by demons. But it was not only the Dark Angels who suffered losses. A squad of Deathwing Knights managed to infiltrate the traitor's Grand Cruiser Vandabraxis, seize control of its weaponry and destroy the vessel. Meanwhile, implacable justice unleashed waves of Ravenwing fighters, destroying several traitor ships, and the Rock and its escort managed to cripple a quarter of Vashtorr's fleet. Ultimately, however, the Loyalists' efforts were in vain, as they failed to prevent the renegades' boarding of the Dark Angels' fortress monastery. After the Dark Angels' fleet was scattered, the Rock found itself facing Aurak Unleashed alone. Using the immense energy projectors installed on the accompanying ships of the Death Fleet, Vashtorr attacked the Loyalists from his ark. The cannon mounted on the ark, combined with the other energy projectors, unleashed a powerful stream of warp energy which disabled the Rock's void shields. Following this, the Arkhifane's fleet released a swarm of landing crafts and boarding torpedoes, and the Rock was boarded. On board the fortress, Supreme Grandmaster Azrael appointed Belial as the overall commander of the Rock's defense, while Ezekiel, Lazarus, Asmodai and Azrael himself moved through the Rock's corridors, turning them into killing fields. Despite the scale of the assault, Vashtorr knew that he was unlikely to completely seize the Rock or annihilate the Dark Angels. However, this was never his objective. He simply intended to push the Dark Angels back, so he could penetrate the depths of the Rock's vaults to obtain his sought-after prize. The battle for the Rock split into two distinct theatres of war. The first battle occurred on the rocky plain surrounding the central command spire of the Rock, known as the Tower of Angels. Here, the Iron Warriors and armoured divisions of the Black Legion, along with hordes of demonic machines, advanced across the Rock's surface, threatening Belial's Strategium and the emergency generators of the Void Shields. Belial ordered the armoured vanguard units, along with a squad of librarians and Ravenwing land speeders, to surface and push back the traitor armour. However, it soon became apparent that the traitors had no intention of pushing further and were content to keep Belial's forces in place. The second and most crucial theatre of operations unfolded in the Rock's depth, where the Arkhifane and his boarding parties sought to obtain what they had come for. Here, the rapid-moving units from the Dark Angels' 8th and 10th Companies attempted to counterattack every new point of breach, while the remaining forces constructed a multi-layered defense securing vital intersections, corridors, lifts, and other key points. Initially, the battle was a chaotic sprint, with breaches forming in the Dark Angel's defense, one after another. In the face of overwhelming assaults by Chaos, led by Black Legion Terminators and demons summoned by the Word-Bearers, the Dark Angel's units suffered heavy losses. But their sacrifice made it possible to establish a second line of defense, primarily around the Vault of Banners under the command of Chaplain Asmodai. Here, Asmodai, leading 50 brothers, repelled 4 consecutive assaults by the traitors, while in the Whispering Dome, the Dreadnoughts and Devastators of the Dark Angels engaged in fierce combat with the Iron Warriors and Warsmith Korag. Although the Dark Angels secured several local victories, it became evident that the main advance of the forces of Chaos towards the Forbidden Gates and the Ascension Well stairway, led by Vashtorr himself, could not be halted. With the aid of Zorphus and the Dark Apostle of the Word-Bearers, Garhathan, the Arkhifane summoned vast hordes of demons who manifested in the Materium and surged into the heart of the rock. In response, Lazarus deployed the forces of the Dark Angels in the Galleria Abscondel, while Azrael retreated to gather elite reinforcements. Soon, Azrael and the Inner Circle, along with their forces, appeared at the southern walls of the Galerium Exacta, on the plains before the Nameless Gate. Battling demons and Black Legionaries, Azrael proclaimed that no enemy would cross the Nameless Gates. Following this cry of fierce combat, Azrael killed Zorphas, and after the death of their leader the legionaries retreated, leaving the demons as a cover. However, it was at this moment that Vashtorr arrived with his forces. As Ezekiel held off the hordes of demons and Lazarus defended the gates, the Arkhifane met Azrael in combat. The battle at the Nameless Gates was particularly brutal, and when Vashtorr hacked the Loyalist Vox Towers, filling the frequencies with interference, forcing many Dark Angels to either remove their helmets or go mad, the fighting turned into a slaughter. Once the Arkhifane and Azrael exchanged blows, it became clear that the Dark Angel could not win the fight despite all his skill. However, something distracted Vashtorr, allowing Azrael not only to wound the demon, but also to retreat back to his ranks. Meanwhile, in the void, the rock approached the Marwent's reach, and Belial finally left the Strategium in the Tower of Angels to enter the battlefield himself, accompanied by the Deathwing Knight's retinue. At this moment, the distraction that had pulled Vashtorr's attention made itself known. All the lights on board the rock went out, and shadows began to dance. The Fallen, along with new detachments of the Word-Bearers and the Alpha Legion, emerged from these shadows and advanced, leading a new, unexpected army. Simultaneously, Chaos Knights of House Korvax appeared at the Tower of Angels, attacking the armoured forces of both Loyalists and traitors. This strange army was led by Belacor, the first prince and arch-nemesis of Vashtorr. Across the Galerium Exacta, a terrible clamour rose as the battle turned into a 3-sided bloody carnage. Fortunately for the Imperials, the appearance of the demons enabled them to strengthen their positions and regain strategic superiority. As amidst the surrounding chaos, Vashtorr and Belacor commenced a deadly duel. After a prolonged skirmish, exhausting the energy of nearby mechanisms and void shields, Vashtorr managed to gather sufficient energy to overcome the shadows of Belacor. However, the Dark Master, still sneering, mocked the Arkhifane for his hubris. Belacor declared that now all of Vashtorr's actions were meaningless, for they would all be killed, and to understand this one need not be a prophet. One only had to look into the void and see that Task Force 12 had finally arrived to assist at the rock. As it turned out, Belacor had initially planned the incursion into the Marwent's reach to lure Vashtorr into a trap. When the fleet under the command of Tigurius approached sufficiently close, the Knights of House Raven landed on the rock and engaged in battle with their counterparts from House Korvax, among whom the Raven Princeps Grevan managed to personally deal with a traitor knight of the Tyrant class. At this very time, the arriving Ultramarines and Nova Marines began their assault on the surface of the rock, and Tigurius personally led the main attack on the Black Legion Marines who were fighting against the armoured units of the Dark Angels. By this time, Samael had already turned the Void War in his favour and had joined forces with Tigurius's fleet. However, Belacor was little concerned with this, for he had no intention of taking sides in the war for the rock, but merely wanted to disrupt the plans of Vashtorr. In a rage, Vashtorr summoned immense power, and taking control of numerous nearby gun batteries, unleashed a barrage of fire that destroyed many war machines, warriors, and severely wounded Belacor himself. Roaring furiously, Belacor vanished into the warp, after which his minions disappeared as well. It was at this moment that the Dark Angels and their reinforcements unleashed all their fury on the surviving forces of Vashtorr. The Arkhifane understood that everything was lost and furiously contemplated the collapse of his plans. He ordered the surviving warships to descend to the rock and extract the remaining forces. Only a few traitors were saved. As for Vashtorr, he teleported back aboard the Aurak unleashed and left the combat area. After the battle, the abandoned Space Marines were captured by the Dark Angels, and after numerous interrogations, they revealed that Vashtorr intended to flee to the Somnium Stars. However, as the Loyalists subsequently understood, the escape was merely part of a new plan devised by the Arkhifane. Meanwhile, Vashtorr's agents from the Alpha Legion led by Lord Glass were searching for an ancient Dark Angels interceptor that held one of the fragments of the key. Although they had to face Orcs, Tau and World Eaters, the legionaries succeeded as they found the key fragment of Arthas Moloch first and crucially before Ugalax. Following Vashtorr's assault on the rock, the Dark Angels and other parts of the Unforgiven gathered their strength to discover the Arkhifane's stronghold and put an end to the demon once and for all. Ultimately, 3/4 of all the forces of the Unforgiven were gathered in the massive mobile fortress monastery, and after a brief council, they decided to dispatch scouts to the Somnium Stars. As soon as the Ravenwing reconnaissance fleet returned with news about the traitor armadas lying in wait, the Dark Angels learned that they faced not only the cult of the Arkhifane and the Black Legion, but also the Emperor's Children, Death Guard, and Word-Bearers. However, the most formidable formation was a Doom fleet under the control of the Dark Mechanicum, bolstered by an ark known as the Netherworld Blade. Moreover, numerous other peripheral Chaos fleets stood in the Dark Angels' path to the Idolatros system, and Azrael declared that orders such as the Cowled Wardens, Blades of Vengeance and Guardians of the Covenant should be dispatched to the Skrylum and Apostra systems to confront these adversaries. The rock itself, along with the immense fleet accompanying it, set course for the Idolatros system, where the Loyalists discovered an unexpected withdrawal of enemy forces. However, one detail from the Ravenwing Scouts' reports remained unchanged. A colossal Doom fleet indeed lay in the Dark Angels' path. Despite the Loyalists' significant numerical advantage, Arkhifane's forces held the upper hand through the infernal technologies of Vashtorr and the apparent enhancement of their weaponry by the power of the Stars of Somnium. Soon, the Dark Angels and their allies suffered heavy losses, and several large ships were obliterated by volleys from Vashtorr's advanced weaponry. Consequently, the Netherworld Blade was able to annihilate an entire squadron of Disciples of Caliban frigates and 2 strike cruisers. Unwilling to retreat, the Dark Angels began boarding actions on several traitor ships, destroying them from within. In the strategium aboard the rock, Azrael and his inner circle surmised that the Netherworld Blade was merely stalling to buy time for reinforcements, on which the heirs of the First Legion had set ambushes in the peripheral systems. Chapter Master Samael led a Ravenwing detachment and boarded the Netherworld Blade from his flagship, the Implacable Justice. He was joined by reinforcements from several strike forces of other orders, and one by one the larger support vessels disabled the Ark's engines. However, in its death throes, the infernal ship destroyed the massive vessel Redoubtable and severely damaged 5 more ships. By the time the Dark Angels withdrew, the Netherworld Blade was a shattered hollow wreck. Satisfied with this sight, Azrael ordered his fleet to regroup and head towards their true objective, Vashtorr. Several hours passed since the Dark Angels' fleet advanced deeper into the Idolatros system, discovering only scattered signs of enemy presence. During this time, the Tech Marines detected a mysterious warp resonance that seemed to be growing stronger. Though its purpose was impossible to determine, It began to interfere with the mechanical systems and even penetrate the minds of those aboard the Loyalist fleet. Finally, the Dark Angels saw what Vashtorr was constructing. It was a monstrosity the size of a planet, created using infernal warp technologies. Horrified, Azrael realized that the Arkhifane had found and modified the remnants of the ancient homeland of the Dark Angels, Caliban. The forces of chaos had named this abomination Wormwood. Worse yet, Abaddon the Despoiler and a sizable fleet of the Black Legion had emerged from the subdimensions of the warp created through Ashtar's infernal technologies. The Supreme Grand Master ordered his fleet to launch a full-scale assault on the perverse legacy of the Dark Angels, twisted by Vashtorr, and personally led the attack on the ruins of Caliban. The plan of the Dark Angels was to clear the main continent of orbital defences and allow the Rock and its accompanying fleet to conduct an exterminatus on a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy. On the surface of Wormwood, the Dark Angels encountered not only legionaries, but also demons, demon engines, dark Skitarii, and cultists. In fierce combat, the Dark Angels, unforgiven, reached the traitors' stronghold, known as the Dark Cathedral, while Azrael and his forces struck at the continental megastructure known as the Warpforge Palace, which the Tech Marines deemed some sort of teleportarium. There, the fragments of the keys gathered by the forces of chaos were stored. Alongside Ezekiel, Belial, and Asmodai, Azrael struck the palace, while the Angels of Redemption, Cowled Wardens, and Bladekeepers launched diversionary attacks. After many nightmarish hours of battle, during which the Angels faced the demon prince Parallaxese, Azrael and his retinue finally reached the heart of the Warpforge Palace. There they discovered an altar made from the ruins of Caliban, where the key fragments were forged. Atop the altar stood a massive brass shrine to Khorne, guarded by the World Eaters and House Bajkar, and at the centre of the altar was a vast summoning circle from which emerged Angron, the Primarch of the World Eaters. In orbit, the Dark Angels began an engagement with Abaddon's fleet, led by the Vengeful Spirit and Vashtorr's Doom fleet, commanded by the Ark of Omens, Aurak Unleashed. The Unforgiven fleet was led by Grand Master Nakir of the Illuminators. However, the Loyalist ships, caught between Wormwood and the Chaos Armada, became easy prey, resulting in Abaddon and Falcus Kibra leading a boarding assault on the flagship Impeccable Justice, which ultimately was destroyed, its wreckage falling upon the Loyalist fleet. The warp engine of the ship exploded, devastating the Dark Angels' fleet. But fortunately for them, the armada of the Blood Angels and the Imperial Navy, commanded by Dante, soon arrived in the Idolatros system. Not understanding how the Allies knew of the Dark Angels' crusade, Nakir was nonetheless overjoyed at their arrival. However, as it was still unknown to anyone present, Dante was accompanied by Lionel Johnson, the recently resurrected Primarch of the Dark Angels. Entrusting the Emperor's son with his mission, Dante proceeded with his own plan, directing the ships of the Imperial Navy to reinforce the defense of the Rock, while his own fleet entered a desperate orbital skirmish. Upon arrival, Dante proudly announced the return of Lionel Johnson, causing complete disbelief and shock among all the heirs of the Dark Angels. Nakir bombarded Dante with questions and oaths, then stated that he was now indebted to the Blood Angels, a debt he could never repay. Together, Nakir and Dante attempted to stabilize the dire situation in orbit, but seeing the Blood Angels' fleet approaching, Abaddon ordered his ships to abandon their current battles and regroup for a counterattack. Vashtorr, in turn, was frustrated by the arrival of the new ships, but did not relent. He reorganized his ships and led the Aurak Unleashed to the Rock. Upon reaching the range of the Rock, Vashtorr, using his technological expertise, made contact with what he had sought all this time, an ancient device of Tuchulka, which had been placed on the Rock millennia ago. Vashtorr already had in his possession related artifact machines, Ouroboros and the Plague Heart, and with the help of the third and final device, she could create a dissonance engine, using the key to gain access to the Old One Vault from the days of the war in heaven. After a brief dialogue, Vashtorr and Tuchulka disappeared into another realm, only to reappear together in a pocket dimension at the heart of Wormwood, beside Ouroboros and the Plague Heart. Finally, Vashtorr had everything he needed to complete his work, the construction of the dissonance engine. However, his teleportation led to the destruction of the Aurak unleashed, along with its perverse intelligence, the Oracle Myriad. With the destruction of the Ark, the Chaos fleet in orbit found itself significantly outnumbered, and the Rock, along with the ships of the Imperial Navy, surged forward, aiming to reinforce the contingent of Dark and Blood Angels at Wormwood. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, a bloody battle raged between the Emperor-loyal Space Marines and the World Eaters, who were supported by demons and Angron himself. Had Lion not arrived in time, Angron would undoubtedly have exterminated all his opponents. However, he was defeated by his brother. After the victory of their Primarch, the Loyalist Space Marines began their retreat, breaking through hordes of demons, and when they finally reached orbit, the Rock opened fire on Wormwood, seemingly delivering a decisive blow to the ruins of Caliban. However, despite the Loyalists having managed to destroy Wormwood and push back Abaddon's fleet by this time, the forces of Azrael and Dante suffered enormous losses. The Lion also fought his way back into orbit and announced that remaining near Wormwood was unsafe, as the traitors had awakened something in the planet's core, something even the Rock could not destroy. Azrael and Dante gave the order for a general retreat, and aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Abaddon felt not only satisfied by the enormous losses he had inflicted upon his enemies, but also bitter over the emergence of another loyal Primarch. It was then that Vashtorr established contact with Abaddon, informing him that he had successfully created the dissonance engine and awakened the key. Now, by utilizing Wormwood, they would be able to seize the planet and, along with it, the weapon. Shortly thereafter, the seemingly unscathed Wormwood tore through the veil of reality itself and plunged into its seething abyss. And despite the return of Lionel Johnson, victory belonged to Abaddon and the Arkhifane. Vashtorr had managed to assemble fragments of the key. I'll repeat myself, are we really going to meet with this being and strike a deal with him? Or perhaps even join his army, becoming part of the Arkhifane's cult? Harrigan spoke discontentedly. He fell silent for a moment before reproachfully continuing, "How low we have fallen, Warsmith. Like you, Harrigan, I fear Vashtorr and have no intention of joining his army. But after what I've just shared, do you really think he will be on the planet? It seems to me at best we can hope for a meeting with one of his forge masters, with whom we can negotiate a beneficial deal. How we might regret this later, I wouldn't want to be smeared into the ground by Vashtorr's hammer. I won't change my opinion, but I will follow orders. After all, I've never regretted it before. Maybe luck will be on our side this time too. I'll go order the landing ships to be prepared for deployment." Turning on the spot, the captain of the Iron Warriors left, and although Narbador personally gave the orders for the preparation of the ships, he did not stop his most loyal supporter, understanding that he needed time to make peace with all that has been said. Humans and other sentient species often blame evil forces, the warp, demons, psychics, and infernal influence for the evil in the world. They like to believe that hatred, violence, and war are unnatural things, that evil people do harm influenced by something from beyond, affecting and manipulating human nature in the worst possible ways. However, Abaddon and Vashtorr denounced evil gods. They hated the idea of someone influencing their decisions. They took pride in their rebellious spirit, their intellect and cunning. Their motives are plain and relatable to any sentient being. They are driven by ego, lust for power, independence, and try to reshape the world in their own way. There are many more examples of evil deeds driven by simple desires, passions, and sins. Some might argue that behind every dark scheme is a demonic influence, hidden even if the actor of the deed does not comprehend this. But what if evil is just a part of sentience? What if evil lives in every one of us, and it's just an excuse to blame demons for everything? Why do some people resist dark urges and others cannot? It is really decided by the strength of the demon at work or the virtues, common sense and decency of the man.